other guest coming up soon is Nick Jesson. Nick Jesson is a guy that refused to pay withholding taxes for his employees. He just gave the full paycheck. Said, you want to pay withholding? You go ahead and pay it. It's not my job. They put him in jail. I want to take you and show you a little clip of Nick Jesson. He was on my show just 8 years ago this July. And a few years after that, he went to jail. Well, he just got out of jail about a year ago, and we're going to have an update. But we're going to take a flashback to Nick Jesson right now. We'll be back in a few minutes.
It's not a court order. And the lady flat-lied and said it is stronger than a court order. You know, and I said, well, please give me the code section. And by all means, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'll comply if you can give me the code section. Well, she couldn't give a code section because there isn't one. So she went on further to say that, well, we're levying under code section 6331. And I told her, I said, well, I see that on the back of your e-legal notice of levy. You know, and I said, but there's a problem with that. And she says, what's the problem? I said, as I said earlier, I said, well, when I went to school, the alphabet started with B. I mean, with A. And your alphabet starts with B. And so I asked her, I said, I want to know why you left off paragraph A and what does it say? She hung up. So I called back and I asked for a supervisor. I got a hold of the supervisor and went through the whole scenario with her. And when I got to the same question, what happened to paragraph A and why did you leave it off and what does it say, she also hung up. What the missing paragraph said, you know, is basically that this levy, you know, only applies to government employees. Not only that, if you look at the parallel table of rules and authorities, the cross-reference under the CFRs, section 6331 falls under Title 27 of the CFRs, the Code of Federal Regulations, which happens to be alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. You know, not Title 26, which, by the way, is not positive law. And my theory on that not being positive law, which I've asked several attorneys and they can't seem to explain it to me, but the reason it hasn't been enacted into positive law because nobody's positive about the tax.
You bring up a good issue. If you've been watching my show for very long, you know I've been saying the federal income tax is a fraud. It was fraudulently adopted, not really ratified. Would you agree with that, Mr. Nick?
Jesson, it's okay.
I'm going to get a lesson on Jesson here.
Right.
But would you agree, is it a fraud? Is the income tax a fraud?
The income tax definitely is a fraud. There's several different groups out there. Some of them argue one issue, some argue another issue, and some of them argue the 16th Amendment that was put in place in 1913. However, if that was true, if the 16th Amendment, you know, really had anything to do with federal income tax, if you think about it, they enacted that in 1913. But the first tax did not appear out of your wages, you know, until 1942, which was called a victory tax. And in 1942, it was either 1 or 2%. I forget which it was. And then in 1944, it was repealed. However, they just kept it going and kept escalating, you know, this tax to where today people are paying 48, 50% of their labor, you know, which I call slave labor because that's a violation of the 13th Amendment, to, you know, an unknown entity such as the Federal Reserve.
You know, I'd have to agree with you, Mr. Jesson. If you just surfed in here, I'm William Wagener on you're watching Second Thought, where I always ask if you lost control of your government. And we've got a candidate for governor of California in 2002, Nick Jesson, who's going to teach us a lesson on how badly things have gone. And he's just described how government agents stormed into his office, right?
Correct.
Had a warrant that was defective.
Correct.
And got away with it.
Well, they're still getting away with it. We've been to the lower court 6 times. In fact, I was supposed to be in court again this morning, but because Judge James Marion, either somebody's gotten to him, you know, or he's just not going to allow, you know, the truth to come out or to honor the Constitution of the United States. But the Fourth Amendment rights were violated, the Fifth Amendment rights were violated, and we have argued this point on 5 different occasions, and each time he says, well, because Mr. Jesson is not a defendant, you know, you cannot argue that case. Well, when you read the Fourth or Fifth Amendment, I don't see any place in the Constitution that stipulates that oh, gee, guys, you got to be a defendant before your constitutional rights are violated. That is totally incorrect. The Franchise Tax Board happened to go to Santa Ana.
Well, yes, I did look younger then. That was about 8 years ago. One of the early On Second Thought episodes with Nick Jesson, who was getting ready to run for governor, and he did run for governor, and obviously did not win the primary. The greater loss was California. We ended up stuck with that horrible Democrat who tripled your vehicle taxes, and then we got rid of him in a special thing, and then we had a special election. We got this Arnold, the butt-pinching, tit-grabbing, you know, from his movie days. He says, oh, I apologize if I misbehaved. Well, yeah, thanks. Tell all the women you fondled on the set there, you know. I guess they didn't care. Most of them got paid somehow under the table and brushed it away. But I invite Bill O'Reilly. Come on my show, Bill. And I just want to discuss one issue, maybe two. Why you're so down on the 9/11 truth. Why not just ask for a people's investigation and have it all out there on national television? And the second thing I want to talk to you about, Bill, is a little love child. I want to know how much money your network or your producers or you had to spend to cover up the love child from your little dalliance on the side. The game, come on my show, Bill. So with that, I've said a lot, yet there's a little more I want you to hear. I want you to hear about this Richard Fine. There ain't too many good attorneys I'll say very much good about. In fact, I just got an email from an attorney in New York City who was kind of miffed over something I said on one of my YouTube clips. Sorry, it's just what I believe. Most attorneys are greedy and here to rip us off, not to help us. But Richard Fine was not one of those. So as we close up here, and I bid you adieu, we go to this interview where Richard Fine is the subject and why the crooked judges got him locked up. See you next week.